Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Daf Ayin Chas, Bava Metzia 78. The Daf Yomi is dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael, for Shmir, for the Chayalim, Matzah, for the Shvuyim. And the Daf Yomi, we're going to start in today's Daf on 77b, 7 lines from the bottom. And Rava says, Haiman de Uspi Mea Zuzi L'Chabre. A person, this is really just an unrelated statement, except for the fact that Rava is giving us financial guidelines, but it's not directly related, at least the way I understand it, to the earlier topics. So the Gemara tells us, Amarava, Haiman de Uspe Mea Zuzah L'Chavra, a person who lent 100 zuz to his friend, Upari Zuze, and his friend, instead of giving him back $100 bill, he gives him $1 a day for let's say 100 days. Then we're going to say it's a valid repayment to the loan, but the person who lent the money is allowed to be upset with the person who did it that way, because the reason is, why is that a problem? The Amrullah, if said the Tinu Minai, because he says you're really costing me money. What's the reason why the borrower is costing him money? Because it's easier to watch $100 bill than if you have little singles running around. If you have little singles, it's easier to do like the impulse buys. You're in the checkout cashier and you're going to buy something that you wouldn't buy otherwise. So the person really should be entitled to get back the whole $100 at once, or at least that would be the right thing to do. So a person who sold a chamra. Now, chamra in the Talmud can sometimes be wine or it could sometimes be donkey. So in this case, Rashi tells us it's a donkey in this case. So a person who sold a donkey to his friend, and his friend, in paying him, paid him everything except for one zuz. But this man who sold the donkey is still running around looking for money. So that's an indication that he really needed the money badly, and so he was selling in order to make the money. So if he didn't make all the money, it's not. It would seem to be it's not a valid sale. So Ravashi is looking at the matter closely. Says, what would be the law here? Kani or low kani? Has it considered like the person who paid, let's say 99 out of the 100? Has he acquired it, or has he not acquired it yet? Is it really a valid sale yet? Amalei Rav Mordechai or Rav Ashi. So Rav Mordechai. That's an unusual name. Rav Mordechai says to Rav Ashi, now, Hachi Amar Avimi me Hagronya Mishmei de Rava Zuze Kezuzi Dami Vlokani. So he says, well, isn't this the same case we just had above? That basically under these circumstances, if there's one zuz left over from the land he was selling, then it's like he's left it all over, and therefore he hasn't acquired it. And both parties could go back until it's a final deal. But we have a different teaching where it's said in the name of Rava that you have acquired it when you paid almost everything. When do we say that you've acquired it if you paid almost everything? That's in a case where the person was trying to, or on top of 78a, that's where the seller was selling it because he thought the field was very bad. Meaning to say he wasn't selling it because he was desperate for money, but rather he was selling it was very bad. And so therefore, he's trying to get the extra zuz to collect so that the person doesn't go back. But he really wants to sell it under all circumstances. And therefore, the seller's state of mind when he received most of the money was that the deal was done. So the Gemara says on top of 78a, Pshita, let's say a person wants to sell something, a field for 100 zuz. As Rashi explains, he desperately needed 100, and so therefore he wanted to sell a small field for 100, but he didn't find any purchasers for his $100 field. But he did have a $200 field, and therefore Zabeh b'Masayim, he sold it for 200. And then what he did was he started looking around for the remaining $100. Because the reason why is because he was trying under those circumstances. So again, what did he do in this case? That he had sold a field for 100. He needed $100, so he sold a field for $200, and so therefore the seller is looking for the purchaser that he should pay him for the land. Then we're going to say under those circumstances he has not acquired it. Lokani, the purchaser is not. He has. He has not acquired the land under those circumstances, because since we see that he only sold the large land, and so therefore that he sold a large land even though that wasn't his intent, and so therefore he's still looking after the money in order to buy this small field. So we see as long as he hasn't got the money yet, he thinks maybe he's not going to have to sell the large field yet. But we have the other case. Eli Bayu is a bune, but let's say he wanted to sell it for Maya for 100. The low ashkach, and he didn't find it. But if he would work a little bit harder, he could have. He just didn't put up any signs. He didn't take out any advertisements. And he did sell for 200, and he's looking for that money. Do we say it's like he sold a bad field and it's a valid? Oh well. So in that case, we're unsure. We leave it unresolved. We really have to know what is the state of mind when he did the sale. Did he really think it was sold at that point? Let's say he hires the donkey drivers or the wagon drivers, and then they quit in the middle. He can hire against them, meaning to say he can make up their salary. We'll see exactly what the Gemara says. Omatan, or he could trick them. So what does it mean? So the Gemara says ad kama sochar, and what does it mean that he could hire other workers to fill in the gap that they left? How much can he hire? Rav Nachman ad kedei secharon. So Rav Nachman says what he could do under these cases. Rash explains. Let's say the wagon drivers or the donkey drivers did, let's say, $20 out of $100 job. So, and then under those circumstances, everything that they are missing from their job, he can pay other workers and they'll complete it. That seems to be what Rashi's saying. Masula, let's say these people who are doing the work, if they did part of the work, but they didn't get any money yet, so then he could hire other workers. I mean, say whatever he's owed to them, he could give to others and they'll complete it. That's what Rashi seems to be saying. But others say no, he's even allowed to do double. Let's say he can't find workers. He can even pay the other workers to fill the place because this guy left him high and dry in the middle. But Rava says Rav Nachman, doesn't the price say until 40 or 50 zuz? Now, when do we say that you can even go up to 40, 50 zuz? It means that you can use their materials that they brought with them to the job. You can even use that to hire the other workers and to fill out the job. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. So by the way, at the introduction to this Mishnah, the first case and the second case look exactly the same, and then we're going to have to see why does the Mishnah only qualify the second case and not the first case. So let's say somebody hires a donkey. Basically, as a renter, he's a rent. You can substitute a car and make it even more relevant. But somebody rents a donkey to go up the mountain, and instead he goes into a valley. What's the difference between a valley, and a mountain? Mountain it's not so hot, but the road is more slippery. Whereas in a valley, the road is not slippery, but there's a danger of the donkey overheating because the air is stifled. So if somebody rents a donkey to take it up the mountain, instead he takes it into the valley, or he rents the donkey to be used in the valley. Instead, he uses it up the mountain. Even though they're both 10 miles from Mesa, and then the donkey drives, chayav. Then we're going to say that one who rents it is going to be responsible. That the renter is going to be responsible to pay for the death of the donkey. So, and the reason is because since he changed from the explicit guidelines, the owner of the animal could say to him, "My donkey died because he wasn't used to these conditions, so therefore the renter has to pay." But let's say let's say somebody rents the donkey to take him up the mountain, and he takes him to the valley, and then in Mechika, under those circumstances, if the donkey slipped, Potter, then we're going to say that if it slipped in the valley, well, then it's the person who rented the donkey, it's not his fault because You're not supposed to slip in a valley. You're supposed to slip on a mountain, and it slipped in the valley. But if the donkey died from overheating in the valley, then he's chayav because you weren't supposed to take it into the valley. Well, let's say he rented it to take into the valley, and he ended up taking it into the mountain. Chayav, if it slipped on the mountain, which is what donkeys do on mountains, then he's going to be responsible because he shouldn't have brought it there. But if it died from overheating in the mountain, it's pater because donkeys typically don't overheat on mountains. Now, but if it overheated because of the strenuous climb, then he's going to be chayav. Then the renter is liable. Let's say somebody rents a donkey. Let's say somebody rents a donkey. Vivrika, and the donkey goes. We'll see what it means. Probably means the donkey goes blind. Oshanasis, Angaria, or the king's. Basically, the king's party comes along and takes the donkey. Omer lo areshal chalafanecha. Then the owner of the donkey can say to the renter, "Sorry, I'm not refunding any of the money to you. This is your donkey. Go and use it." Meaning to say that I was blinded or it's being used by the king, that's your fault. That wasn't that wasn't my responsibility. Meso nishbar, but let's say the donkey dies completely or it breaks completely, then if it completely breaks, then the owner of the donkey would have to provide a new donkey to the renter who was renting it for a period of time. So the Gemara says, Ma'ishna reisha delu kamaflik. So the Gemara says, why is there a difference in the first case where the Mishnah just says that the renter is responsible if he deviates, and why in the second case does it talk about if he deviates, how the animal gets affected? If it's in a valley and it overheats after its deviation, then he's responsible, for example. So what's the distinction between the first clause and the second clause? So Amri, Debei Rabbi Yani, in the first case, the animal died because it wasn't used to the airspace in the place that it went to after you deviated. He said that the air of the mountain killed it, or the air of the valley killed it. And so therefore the person who deviated is responsible. That's the first answer. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says, no, we're talking about, says Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, in the first case that we didn't qualify, that's a case where we're talking about where it died from being too tired. And so therefore, if it would die going up the mountain, he could say that it climbed as a result of being too tired going up the mountain. Or if it went in the valley, it died from the heat from being too tired. So therefore, he doesn't have to qualify it. Rabba Amar Kagon Shekisha Nachash. No, Rabba says that the first case is talking about where a snake bites it. A snake bit it after it was in a place it wasn't supposed to be. And he says that was your responsibility because you went into the wrong place. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba says the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Now what's our Mishnah? That the first clause of a Mishnah is where he says you're always responsible. Who is that like? That's like Rabbi Meir. The Amar called Mavir al Da Shabal Bayis Nikra Gazlan. Because Rabbi Meir's on the position, we had this Gemara several places throughout the Shas. Rabbi Meir says, if you change from what the owner said, then you're called a robber. And since you're called a robber, the second you deviated, so this is the first clause of the Mishnah is following the position of Rabbi Meir. He says, whenever you deviate from the explicit instructions of the owner, you're immediately called a robber. And so therefore you're responsible for the animal because it's yours, because you acquired it at that point. And a robber, since he acquired it, then he can't say, oh, I was renting it, I'm not responsible for this. So since he's a robber, he's responsible at that point. Gemara says, but wait, where does Rabbi Meir say this? We'll go through several examples to try and see which ruling of Rabbi Meir is similar to this. Hi, Rabbi Meir. Which Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir did Sava. If you want to say the Rabbi Meir who gave his ruling about dying, did Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, Bava Kama, no, he's saying, Oh, Adam, you give your wool to the dyer to dye it red. If it's Savu Shachar, the dyer dyes it black. Shachar v'tavo Adam, or black, and he dyes it red. Rameir says no single demade tomorrow. Rameir says that the person who deviated, he basically stole it, and he just has to pay him for the cost of wool, what it cost to buy that raw materials. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, in Mashalach Yashtray, Rabbi Yehuda's position is that the workman who deviated gives gives him that you have to pay him the lower of the two, either for the expenses that he put in or for the improvement, whichever is lower. But Rabbi Meir there clearly says that this person stole it. So isn't that Rabbi Meir what we're talking about? Maybe it's not a good analogy to our case. Maybe the case of the wool is different. The Kanya B'Shinoi Ma'isa. Because there, since he did an action upon the wool, he acquired it by doing an action on the wool, as opposed to the donkey didn't do any explicit action. So maybe this is not what Rabbi Meir would rule here. So maybe it's the other Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir, the Midbas Purim. We learned about somebody who collects money for Purim. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa. Migbas Purim or Purim. That if you collect money for Purim, you have to use it for Purim. Migbas a year. If you collect money for Purim for one specific city, well, Usa a year, you have to use it for that city. And you're not allowed to be medactic on the matter. What does that mean? Rashi says, Lomar Dayam B'Pachos. You're not allowed to say, oh, they don't need this much money for Purim, and let's take the extra and let's just put it in the charity box. No, you can't do that. Now, let's say you have extra money. What do? You take the calves and you make a big party and you slaughter it for the poor. You feed it to the poor. And if that's left over, that they can't eat it all, then you put it into the charity box and you make a big kiddush the next day too. Rabbi Elazar says, Migbaz Purim with Purim, ve'ina ani rishai l'kachman ritzuo sandalo almkein hisne b'mamad ancheir. Divrei Rabbi Yaakov. So Rabbi Yaakov's position, Rabbi Elazar's position is that the money that you collect for Purim, it has to be for Purim, and the poor person can't even change, even to buy a strap for a shoe unless he made a stipulation in front of the people of the town. That's the position of Rabbi Yaakov, who said in the name of Rabbi Meir. So we see from here that the position of Rabbi Meir is that you can't change it all. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says you're Mekel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is lenient. But anyway, we see from here the position of Rabbi Meir is that you can't change it all. And that seems to be like the position of our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, no, the two cases are not the same. Dilma, maybe that case is totally different. Hasam Nami, perhaps with respect to the collection of money on Purim, what's the reason that you can't change it? That the Purim Yahweh, that they gave it to him specifically for Purim. But they didn't give it to him with the idea that he can use it for anything else. And so therefore, specifically for Purim, he would be like stealing it. But that is not necessarily the case with the renter. So the Gemara says, it accords with the following position of Rabbi Meir. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer B'Shur Meir. I know so dinar la'ani l'kachol chalok l'ikach l'talis. If you give some money to a poor person that he should buy like a coat, you can't use it to buy like a talis, a different type of garment. Talis l'ikach chalok, or the opposite. Because he's changing the mindset he's changing from the intent of the owner. So we see from here where Meir is saying you can't change from the intent of the owner. You're not allowed to. So that's the same thing with respect to the rental. So no, maybe that case is different because maybe you'll come to suspect him, the person who gave it to him. That because people are going to say, he's going to say, people are going to make the complaint and they'll say that he said that he's going to buy this type of garment for the poor person, and that's why he collected this charity, but he didn't buy it for him. Or he said that he said he was going to buy this coat and he didn't buy it for him. And so there people will suspect him. So the Gemara says, no, if that would be the case, then it should have said, oh, because then people will accuse him. As we see, but it actually says in this price because he's changing from the intent of the owner. See from here, it's because he's changing from the intent of the owner. And so therefore, whoever changes from the intent of the owner is going to be called a robber, and that's the Rabbi Meir's position. And so therefore, if going back to the donkey, if you rented it to be used in the mountain and then you used it in the valley, even if what would have happened in the mountain valley would have happened in the mountain, and normally you would be exempt, but in this case, you're considered like a robber the second you deviated according to the mayor, and therefore the renter is responsible. So what about if you rent a donkey and the donkey goes blind? Then the owner could say to the donkey, the renter, that's your fault. What does it mean, hivrika? So my hivrika, achitargimu nehorisa. It means he's blind. Norisa means he has light, but that's in a euphemism for saying he's blind. Ravo says avzekes. No, it got some like worms in its feet. Uda amru avzekes. The mills of the Malka. Somebody had said, "Oh, there's some worms in the king's clothing." Or like a moth. There's moths in the king's clothing. So they said to him, "What is it on? Betali kesef or betali da'av? Is it on the silver utensils or the gold utensils?" Means to say, is it on the linen, that's the silver, or the wool, which is the gold? Ikidamri betali kesef amar. Some say he said it's on the silver, v'katlua, and they killed him because the moths don't go onto the linen; they only go on the wool. Or ikadamri betali da'av amar v'shefkua. They say, some say he said it's on the gold, and they praised him. Oshanasis Anguria, or if the king took it for his party, then the owner could say to the renter, "Listen, that's your loss. I rented you a perfectly good donkey. The fact that the king took it from you, I'm not giving you another donkey for your days of your rental." So I'm a Rav. When do we say that the owner can claim this? There used to be like a type of Angaria where they would take the donkey, use it for a few weeks. Actually, what they would do is they would use it till they came to the other donkey, another person's donkey, and then they would give it back. So then, therefore, the renter lost it for some of the time, but he didn't lose it completely. But if it would be a type of seizure where the king seizes it and never returns it, then the owner would be chayav l'amid lo chamor. Then he'd have to give him another donkey because then it's like the donkey was died, and then the owner would have to replace it. Shmuel Amar bein angaria choseres bein angaria she'eno choseres. Shmuel says doesn't matter if the king was planning on returning it. In b'derech halicha nitla, if it was while the donkey driver was walking with the donkey on his path, then you say, "Here's your donkey." The owner could say to the renter, "Here's your donkey." Rashi explains, because that's what they used to do. The seizures of the donkeys, they would take from one, and then they would walk. The owner would walk after it, and then they'd take another one. And whatever donkey the party would inquire first, he would take, and he would return the original one. And then the second one would go after the donkey until they seized another one. So therefore, he says to him, "Since it was your bad luck because you were on that path, therefore I don't have to replace it." But says back to the Gemara. But if it wasn't on that path that it was taken, then he's going to have to give him another donkey, because then it wasn't his bad luck. That was just basically an accident that happened to the original owner. So the Gemara says we have a challenge to this. We have a contradiction to this because it says somebody rents out his donkey Vivrika and it goes blind, or the donkey goes insane. You could say to the person, "Here's your donkey." Mesa Oshanasis and Garia, if it dies or is seized by the king, he has to give him another donkey. So this makes sense according to Bishlam Rav. This makes sense according to Rav, who says it doesn't. When do we learn this law? Only by a donkey that goes back. Then we say the renter is responsible. So, but by a donkey doesn't go back, the renter is not responsible. The owner is responsible. So here in this price, so where it says that he says if it's an Angaria, the owner has to replace it, he can say there's a distinction. So talking about two different scenarios. One is a donkey that's not seized forever, and one is the one that's seized forever. And with Shmuel, but according to Shmuel, who says no such distinction, that it doesn't matter if he's going to return it or not, the owner doesn't have to replace it. Kasha, that it's difficulty. And if you want to say, well, no, Shmuel will explain it. If you want to say Shmuel is going to draw the distinction, it says, well, it depends whether or not the donkey was on the original path. But we don't say that because from the next clause it says Rabbi Shimon says in If it was taken while it's on its path, you could say here's your donkey. That otherwise you have to give him a donkey. We call it the Tanakama Lo Shanilei. The Tanakama doesn't draw that distinction. So what would Shmuel say? So he says, no, I hold like Rabbi Shimon Elazar. That's enough for me. Ani Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, I found Rabbi Shimon Elazar's position that there is such a distinction between whether or not it was on the path. You buy the same cool Rabbi Shimon Elazar here, or you could say the whole thing is Rabbi Shimon Elazar. The Chisuri Mechsera and the Brisa, we're just missing some words. You say if you rent a donkey and it becomes blind, don't ishtatis or insane. The owner could say to the renter, here's your donkey. Meso shenazas angloria. Let's say the donkey died or the king seized it. Then he has to give him another donkey. When do we say this? Where it wasn't taken while it was on its main path. But if it was taken while it was on the path that the owner was walking on, then he could say, here's your donkey. That's the position of Rabbi Shimon Elazar. So Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer because Rabbi Shimon Elazar's position was if it was taken while the donkey owner was walking on his path, he could say, the owner could say that's your bad luck. Otherwise, he has to give him a donkey. So Gemara asks the question: can you really establish that this brisa was like Rabbi Shimon Elazar? But the first clause says if the donkey goes blind or insane, you could say here that's your bad luck. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says that but we have another statement from Shimon Elazar. He says if you rent the donkey to ride on it and it goes blind on a shtata, that you do have to give him another donkey. So that contradicts Rav Shimon Elazar. So how can you say that the whole price of Rav Shimon Elazar is just, you just have to amend the text there? So Amar Barafuna or Kovala Shani. He says, no, if you intended to ride on it, that's going to be a different law, because Rav Shimon Elazar says there, you can't do if it's blind, and so therefore you clearly have to give him another donkey. But if it was just to regular work, the donkey can work while it's blind. It just can't. It's not going to have as much. It's not going to be as effective. Amar Rav Papa, and Rav Papa says a glass utensil is karchovo adami. He says a glass utensil. If you hire the donkey in order to carry a glass utensil, that's like you hired it to ride, because there, if it falls, it's going to break. You would never use a blind donkey to carry glass, and so therefore you'd have to replace it. And we'll stop the recording here, and we wish, if anybody has any questions, happy to address.